Okay, hello class. Welcome to the first Flip the Classroom presentation. I hope this goes well and that you guys get a lot out of this process. Today we're going to talk about HTML. We're going to learn the basics of HTML so that you guys can go through the recipe card HTML exercise 1.3. So, in this presentation, I am going to be going through a PDF that is on the resources page of the blog in case you want to look over that again separate from the video. So that'll be right here. If you click on it, it will load the presentation. Okay, so what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language and is the standard markup language for creating web pages and web applications. With cascading style sheets, or CSS, and JavaScript, it forms a triad of cornerstone technologies for the World Wide Web. Basically, HTML is the coding language that is the structure for every website that you look at. And it looks something like this. In this tutorial, we're going to look at the basics of HTML so that you can build the framework for your recipe cards. Each of your cards contain the same information, so theoretically you would only need to make one HTML file for all of them and use different CSS files to make each recipe card match your designs. So let's get to it. Since we have Creative Cloud for you all, we're going to use Dreamweaver to build our sites. Open up a new HTML page in Dreamweaver, File, New, and under New Document, you can see document type HTML, and then press Create. Might take a few seconds to load. Dreamweaver opens new files with the basic framework for a site already there, but since we're learning from scratch, we're just going to select and delete everything. Then we can save this empty file, just so that we start off with our files organized and in the correct place so that we start that habit. Okay, so File, Save As. And then think about how you organize your files. I have mine set up in folders within folders to keep it as organized as possible. All my teaching files in this folder, and then by semester, Fall 2017, and then the classes, Web 1. And then you can start recipe cards, which is the assignment. And this, here we go. You can see it like this, Web 1, recipe cards. And then we're going to be working on Recipe 1. You're going to have 10 folders in here eventually, but we're just starting with the first one. So Recipe 1, and this is going to be recipe1.html. Then you can save it. And now you can see in Finder, in Recipe 1 folder, is the recipe1.html. Okay, now that you have your file saved in a new folder, we can start writing HTML code. Like I said, HTML looks something like this, kind of chaotic. It's built using tags, elements, and tags. HTML documents are defined by elements, and tags. Tags are brackets that open and close around a specific bit of information or content. So there's an opening tag, which is a left bracket, the content, the type of tag, and then the right bracket. And then a closing tag is the same, but it has a slash. So here's an example for headings. H1, then you put the heading text, and then you close it around the actual text that's in there. Okay, so that's a tag. elements, as you can see right here, is everything from the opening tag through the closing tag. So elements contain both of the tags and the information that's in between. So while this is a tag, this whole thing is an element. Each HTML element tells the browser something about the information that sits between its opening and closing tags. This format is how an entire HTML page is structured. Okay, so we're going to start here. Go into your open blank HTML file, and we're going to start with the first tag. You have to set up the file so that when a browser opens it, it knows what kind of information it is. And so we're going to set it up. We're going to put bracket HT, not capital, HTML, and then close it. And Dreamweaver does something that is sometimes helpful, but oftentimes really annoying. It auto closes your tags. This is partially because it's a good habit to when you open your tag, to immediately close it so that you don't have a lingering open tag somewhere. This could cause a lot of errors later on. It's also annoying because sometimes you want to have a little bit more control, which is why some people use different programs. But I'm going to press enter so that we have space in between the opening and closing tag to add all of the content that is going to be included in the HTML document that we want to see in our browser. Okay, so now we need to tell the browser which content inside the HTML document we want to be displayed within the browser window. Basically, what is the body of the document? We do this by opening and closing what is called the body tag inside the HTML tags. So we open the body tag, and note that it is indented. This is to show that these tags are within the HTML tag. Everything inside is what will be displayed in the web browser. HTML works like a sandwich. If it opens, you need to close it, and then you put the relevant content inside its respective tags. So the body is within the HTML document, and the content we put in here, which is also indented, is within the body tags. So let's put something inside the body tag and then open it in the browser so we can see what this looks like. Since we're going to be making recipe cards, I'm going to put the title of my recipe in there. And I have mine ready, so I'm just going to copy this, put it in here, and paste it. And then I'm going to save the file. So you can do File, Save. You can also do the shortcut, which is Command S. Okay. Then in your Finder, you can just double click, and it'll open your page. And you can see that now within the browser, it says pesto chicken with summer squash. Okay, so that worked out great. Let's move on to the next step. So there are some other things that we need to tell the browser about the file that we don't want displayed in the viewer, right? So we want some text up here, but some things we don't want to display, but the browser needs to know. We put that information before the body in a separate element called head. The head is where you would put links into supporting code, like your CSS pages or JavaScript links. And that goes the same level as the body. It's not within it, but it's within the HTML, and it's called head. Remember, when you open, you must close it. Then I'm going to press enter so we have space to put content inside of it. So in addition to links, such as linking to your CSS pages or JavaScript pages, You can also put a title tag in the head. And I'm going to call it recipe 1. We don't want this text to appear in the browser window, but we want the browser to know what the title of the page is. So save this file, and then come over here and refresh the page. You can see that nothing changed here, but here is where the information changed, right? So now the browser knows that this file is called recipe 1. It doesn't change anything in the browser window, just this tab up here. Okay, now moving back to the content that appears inside the window. Let's start writing some HTML markup. When creating a web page, you add tags, also known as markup, to the contents of the page, providing extra information for browsers to employ. There are two types of markup, structural and semantic. Structural deals with the building blocks of the information, and it takes its name specifically from the idea that the web document has an outline-like structure. And then semantic describes the type of content that is held within the tags. So semantic is when tags are chosen according to what they mean. It is imperative that you remember that semantic tags and markup is not just for how it looks. It is telling the browser what type of information it is. Although this is not super important, it's nuanced in the differences, and they don't really matter at this point, but it will become more clear in time as you start using and writing code. We started with some structural HTML when we used the HTML head and body tags. Now we're going to try our hand at semantic markup. Semantic markup, I'm just going to move this because there we go. Semantic markup tells the browser what kind of information it is reading, so we can categorize the type of content that appears on the page, such as the H1, or the heading, we will use H1, and we're going to do that for the recipe title, right? So this is the main heading on the page. It's the recipe name. So we're going to add an H1. And here's where this auto closing of your tags becomes annoying. You can just select it, cut, and paste at the end. But do note how it is closed. It's a bracket, a backslash, H1, and then a closing. Okay, so now we have set our title as the heading, or H1, and then we're going to save it, and then open it up and refresh it in your browser. Refresh it in your browser right here. And as you can see, it got larger and bold. Right. There are also ways to make subheadings, or maybe up to 6 subheadings, right? So you can do H1 or you can do other ones. So a subheading within our document might be, set up H2, might be the ingredients, right? And of similar importance, so also H2, would be the directions. I'm going to save it. And then refresh. And I'm going to make sure that I spelled this right, which I did not. There we go. Okay. after you have headings and subheadings, you can also add paragraph text or just body copy as we reference it in InDesign and print production. And in my recipe, I have some text here, some paragraph text underneath my title that just talks about like how many servings it is, what's the serving size, and carb grams per serving. So I'm just going to copy this text. I'm going to open a paragraph, which is just P. It automatically closes it, and then I'm going to press, oh, that's interesting. Paste. Okay. So, I'll just clean this up a little bit. Just to keep things clear for myself. Okay, so now when we look at this, you see that even though there are enters here and they make a new line and they were here, right now it's all on one line. And that's because when you make a paragraph, everything within the opening and closing tags is a running line. It doesn't matter if you press enter in your HTML, it will just continue. And if you want it to start a new paragraph or a new line, you have to close here and then open it again. And I want it to end this line. And I want this to start a new line. So now those are all separate paragraphs. If this starts to get visually confusing, it actually comes in handy that those enters don't really do anything, because you can use the enter to create space in your HTML document to make it easier for you to follow along. Now if I click in here, it created the text on 3 lines. So we have 3 paragraphs underneath the heading. Okay, so let's save it and refresh it in your browser. Perfect. Looks exactly the same as in the split view in Dreamweaver. Okay, I think we can do better than this. Let's add a little more markup. So by default, the heading tag is bold and large, and the whole paragraph is in regular weight. But if you want only part of your paragraph text to be bold, you can add a tag that will make it that way. It's the bold tag. And so let's say I want this to be bold. I can go into the paragraph and put a bold tag around the text that I want to be bold. And then you can click up here and you see now makes is bold. See, this is where that gets annoying. Serving size. And carb grams per serving. Okay, there we go. So save and refresh it in your browser. It's always good to see what it looks like in your browser, because we're doing something really simple now and these look identical, but oftentimes once you get into CSS, there are differences between how the code will look in Dreamweaver versus the browser. So it's a good habit to get into to look at it in both. You can also add italics. So maybe something is deserving of an emphasis. So what you can do is maybe I want with, I don't know why, to be italic. Okay, and now with is italicized. Okay. So in addition to having headings, paragraphs, and subheadings with bold and italic text, each of your recipes needed to include a footnote. So to show this note, you can use super or subscript. So let's take, makes 4 servings and add a footnote to it. So within the paragraph, I'm going to add a 1, just like you do when you reference footnotes in your essays and your papers that you write for other classes. So I'm going to put this 1 here, and then around the 1, I'm going to make it a superscript. So you just put soup around it. Actually, let's put that like that. So now there is a superscript 1 here, and that's telling the viewer that down below or somewhere else there's going to be a reference from this reference number. So I have it down here. So I'm just going to copy this information so I don't have to type it all out by hand. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add subscript. Put all of that information in there. Something I don't want included in that, because if you look at this, now the 1 is, it is small and it's lower, but it's the same positioning as the rest of the text. And we want that to come above, so I'm just going to remove that, and I'm going to create one more superscript and put the 1 in there like this. So now it really references it from this section here to down there. Okay. And it looks like on here it's servings per recipe 4, and then it starts a new line. In order to do that, I would need to, similarly to the paragraph, close the subscript on the new line, open the subscript, and it was already closed, but make sure it's closed. And did I not do it right? Interesting. Okay. We all learn things. So, subscript is not like paragraph. Paragraph automatically starts a new line, but subscript doesn't do that. So how do we start a new line if it's not within a paragraph, or if we don't want to start a new paragraph? Something we can do is a line break. So you open the bracket, you do BR line and close it, and that's a line break, and it starts a new line. So now there are 2 lines like this one. So I'm going to save it, come here, refresh it, and you can even see the differences here. There's more space between these 2 lines there than there are here. Just interesting. Okay, so we have a great deal of your information already up there, a great deal of the structure of a recipe card there. But a majority of the recipe card is made up of lists, right? The ingredients and the directions. These are 2 different types of information. the unordered list of ingredients and the ordered list of directions. So the ingredients can be listed in any order, but the directions need to happen sequentially. The code for lists is very particular. Like all markup, we need to create a sandwich of tags. So what we're going to do under ingredients in HTML document is we're going to start an unorganized list. We do this by opening a UL tag and make sure it closes right away. I like to press enter so it creates a tab and I can see everything that's going to be inside the unorganized list. So now we need to add list items. We do this by putting them in list item tag or the LI tag, right? And so I'm going to go to my text and just copy each one at a time. And then you just go down and keep adding each list item, one at a time. If you have a lot of ingredients in your recipe, it's going to take you a little bit of time to get through this. But it's necessary to put all of the items in a list inside individual list items. This allows us to later reference the styling of list item and it'll change the style of all of them, so we don't have to add additional markup and code in our CSS. So doing a little extra work here will make less work later. Okay, I'm going to just press enter so that there's a clear separation between the ingredient section and the direction section. And so you can see here, there we go, all of the list items. You can also see that each item begins with a bullet point. I don't want you to worry about this because we can change that later when we start working in CSS. Don't let the bullet points or your desire to not have bullet points deter you from using unorganized lists and list items. Okay. So this type of list works well for the ingredients on a recipe card because we can interchange them. But the directions need to be in a very particular order or things could go very wrong. Therefore, we're going to make an ordered list. It's very similar to an unordered list, but instead of wrapping it with the UL, we wrap it with an OL, so an organized list. And inside the organized list, same as before, we have list items. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to copy the directions. Luckily mine only have 2 steps. It's pretty great. And then add a second. Make sure that everything is lined up. A second list item. There we go. And you can see here, there are numbers instead of bullet points. And that is what makes an organized list different than the unorganized list, are the numbers. And those happen automatically. Again, there are many things we can do to style those numbers in CSS, so don't worry too much about that now. Okay, remember to save often, and we can come to our card and refresh, It's looking pretty good. Okay, so you now have almost all of the parts necessary to code the HTML for your recipe cards. One more thing we're going to add that will help organize all the content within your HTML document and will make writing your CSS more efficient later on. We're going to divide the content into sections. So in class today, we drew boxes around the different groupings of content, and in your code, you're going to create divisions or divs around those elements, right? So we're going to add what is called a div tag. So divs are groupings of content that can be referenced later in CSS. And so it looks like this. So I'm going to put a div around everything that would be a header for me. So I'm going to put a div around this content. Make sure if you open it that you close it. A nice feature of Dreamweaver is that if you click on the div, the opening div, it will show you where the closing div is. So you can be really clear about what content is inside it. Another great feature of Dreamweaver is that if you select lines, you can press tab and it will indent all of those lines. And this is just a trick to help keep your code organized so that when you are parsing through it, you can easily pull out the divs and the content that is within it. Or, we did this up here. We know the head is inside the HTML, the body is inside the HTML, but the body is not inside the head because they're at the same level, right? Title is inside head. The div is inside body. H1 is inside the div. Okay, you get the idea. And so I'm going to also create a div around ingredients because that seems to be another grouping of content, right? So this heading and this unorganized list. I'm going to do that here. Div. I'm going to cut that and paste it afterwards. And then I'm going to do one around the directions as well, so including the header, the subhead directions, and the organized list. It's too confusing to me to not indent, so I'm going to do that for both of these. It really helps keep you organized. And again, if it's in a paragraph or list item, you can press tab or enter in the HTML and it's not going to affect what it looks like. Okay, and then one more. I'm going to make a div around the footer content. Right, so it's just putting divs around content that can be grouped together. And now you can see up here, if you are in the design mode, that you can see that there are boxes around this content. And you can even click on the box and it'll highlight the content within it. Right, don't worry, these boxes are not visible in your browser. So save it and refresh. You'll see nothing has changed. Right? Visually, the div doesn't do anything on its own. It's a reference that you can use in CSS later to make things look different. So now that we have multiple div boxes, if we want to move or change one of them and not another one in CSS, we need to be able to distinguish between them. So in the opening divs, we are going to create a special ID for each one, right? So we're going to add some text to identify which div we're talking about. We're going to do that with div ID. So div IDs name the divs for easy reference. So we were already talking about this first div, right? You put the ID within the opening div, and we were talking about this section as the heading. So you do div ID equals, and then quotation marks, and you can call these whatever you want. The only restrictions on names for div IDs is that it can't use spaces and it can't start with numbers. It just confuses them. So I'm going to just call this heading, but you can call it whatever you want. It is case sensitive when being referenced. So if it's lowercase here, it has to be lowercase in your CSS. But it doesn't matter if you want to make a capital H for heading or not. I'm not going to, because then I will have to do it later. Okay, and then around this div, I'm going to start calling this content. Because if you have two divs that are separate boxes but have the same visual attributes, like width or background color and text color, you can give both divs the same ID. So the div ID for the directions can be the same as the div ID for the directions, right? So the ingredients and the directions can have the same div ID. They're still separate boxes and they're still separate divs, but you can write CSS rules that will apply to both of them. If you gave them two separate names, you'd have to define those rules and create styles for both of them separately. If you give them the same name, they'll both follow the same rules. Okay, so now we're going to save it, view it in the browser to make sure that everything is all right. And if it is, you should be done with exercise 1.3. Now, if yours doesn't look like this, or you got some sort of error message in your code, don't worry. You can go through and try to troubleshoot for errors. Check and make sure that all your tags are properly opened and closed. Make sure that there are elements not floating around, that everything, if you click on the opening one, is closed, has a closing tag, right? Where it will get tricky are things like these divs where there's lots of content in between, things like this, right? So make sure, go through and double check to make sure that all of your tags are opened and closed. If they're not, you may get some errors in there. Feel free to go back through this tutorial as many times as you need to, and just do your best. On Tuesday, we will go over any issues you may encounter together, and we will figure it out. All right, happy coding!